Have you ever wondered why, despite your efforts, you keep attracting the same situations over and over again? Perhaps they're draining relationships, unsatisfying jobs, or that constant feeling that something is missing in your life. It's not a coincidence. Carl Jung, one of history's most brilliant psychologists, discovered a truth that could completely transform your existence. The way you nourish your mind literally creates your reality. Think about it for a moment. Stop everything you're doing and ask yourself, am I feeding my mind with thoughts that build me up or tear me down? Are my beliefs bringing me closer to the life I desire or pushing me away from it? This question might seem simple, but it contains the secret of why some people manage to manifest extraordinary lives, while others remain trapped in cycles that seem impossible to break. Jung developed the concept of the collective unconscious, that dimension of our psyche that shares universal symbols and archetypes. But what many ignore is how this understanding can radically transform your everyday life. When you understand that your mind is constantly creating your experience, you begin to take responsibility for every thought you cultivate. Imagine that your mind is a garden. Each thought is a seed. Some thoughts are like flowers that beautify your existence, while others are like weeds that choke your potential. Jung discovered that it's not just what you consciously think that matters, but also what you feed in your unconscious. Those deep patterns, those ingrained beliefs that you don't even know you have, are shaping your reality at this very moment. Have you noticed how some people seem to have a magnet for negative situations? The person who always ends up in toxic relationships, the friend who constantly faces financial crises, or perhaps you yourself repeating patterns that you consciously wish to avoid. Jung would explain this as the result of what you're nurturing in your unconscious. Your deepest fears, your insecurities, your limiting beliefs, all these mental seeds eventually sprout in your external reality. This isn't abstract philosophy or superficial positive thinking. It's a deep understanding of how our psyche works and how it interacts with the world. Jung dedicated his life to mapping these internal territories and discovered that there is an undeniable connection between our inner world and what we manifest in our lives. Synchronicity, another fundamental concept of Jung's, shows us how seemingly casual events are connected by meaning, not by causality. Those significant coincidences you experience aren't accidents of chance. They are manifestations of the relationship between your unconscious mind and material reality. When you start paying attention to these synchronicities, you're observing how your inner world is reflected in the outer world. But here's the revelation that can change everything. You have the power to consciously alter what you mentally nourish. You can choose which thoughts to cultivate and which to discard. And in doing so, you literally rebuild the reality you experience. Jung understood that this transformation begins with the inner journey, with what he called individuation, the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche to become a whole being. It's not an easy path. It requires courage to face your shadows, those parts of yourself that you have repressed or denied. Many avoid this inner work because it's uncomfortable. They prefer to blame external circumstances, other people, or fate for the situations they face. But Jung challenges us to a deeper understanding. Your external reality is a reflection of your internal landscape. If you want to change what you experience, you must change what you mentally nourish. Think about the people you spend the most time with. Do they elevate you or drain you? The books you read, the videos you watch, the conversations you have, all of this is nourishing your mind in ways that you may not even consciously perceive. Each experience is a seed planted in the garden of your psyche, and like any garden, what flourishes depends on what you plant and how you care for it. Remember the last time you felt a deep resonance with something or someone? That feeling of, this is exactly what I needed to hear, or this person came into my life at the perfect moment. Jung would explain this as a manifestation of your unconscious mind, working to guide you toward what you need for your evolution. When we nourish our minds with thoughts that expand us, we begin to attract experiences that reflect that expansion. But beware. The opposite is also true. If you constantly feed thoughts of scarcity, insufficiency, fear, Don't be surprised when your reality begins to reflect exactly that. Not because there's some mystical force punishing you, but because you're programming your perception to filter reality through those limiting beliefs. The true power of Jung's teachings lies in understanding that we are not passive victims of our circumstances. We are active co-creators of our experience. When you change the way you interpret your experiences, when you alter the stories you tell yourself about yourself and the world, you literally reconstitute the reality you perceive. Does that sound too simple? Consider this. Jung discovered that many of our mental patterns operate below the radar of our consciousness. We don't realize how these underground currents are shaping our experiences. The anxiety you feel before a presentation, the unconscious sabotage you experience when you're about to achieve something important, the way you relate to money or love. All of this is being influenced by unconscious patterns that you may have inherited from your family, your culture, or early experiences. But here's the good news. Awareness is the first step toward transformation. Simply by becoming conscious of these patterns, you begin to break their control over you. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. Suddenly, you can see the obstacles that were making you stumble before. Jung called this process making the unconscious conscious, and he considered it the most important work any human being can undertake. It's not just about temporarily feeling better or applying superficial positive thinking techniques. It's about a fundamental reorganization of your psyche, a transformation that affects every aspect of your life. Now let me ask you, what are you nourishing in your mind right now? Are you feeding thoughts of abundance or scarcity? Of self-love or merciless self-criticism? Of infinite possibilities or limitations? If you're honest with yourself, you'll probably find a mix of both. We all have lights and shadows, thoughts that elevate us and others that sink us. Jung taught us that the goal is not to completely eliminate the shadow. That would be impossible and counterproductive, but to consciously integrate it. When you recognize and accept those parts of yourself that you've rejected, you take away their power to control your life from the shadows. Think of someone you know who constantly sabotages themselves when they're about to achieve something significant. Perhaps it's even you. Jung would explain this as a conflict between the conscious desire for success and an unconscious fear of what that success might mean. Perhaps at some deep level, you believe you don't deserve success, or that it will distance you from being loved, or that it will fundamentally change who you are. These unconscious fears are powerful precisely because they operate beneath the surface. But when you illuminate them with the light of consciousness, when you examine them with curiosity instead of judgment, they begin to lose their hold over you. And this is where true transformation begins. The way you nourish your mind determines which seeds will flourish in your mental garden. If you constantly feed thoughts of gratitude, you begin to notice more things to be grateful for. If you cultivate the belief that you are worthy of love, you begin to attract relationships that reflect that belief. Not because the universe is rewarding you, but because you have reconfigured the filters through which you perceive and experience reality. Jung understood that the mind is not just a passive receiver of information, but an active creator of meaning. Every experience you have is being interpreted through the lenses of your beliefs, expectations, and mental patterns. Changing these lenses means fundamentally changing what you experience as reality. Let me share a powerful example that Jung explored: dreams. He discovered that our dreams are not simple random wanderings of the sleeping brain, but profound messages from our unconscious. If you pay attention to your dreams, to the symbols that appear repeatedly, to the emotions they evoke, you will begin to receive vital information about what is happening in the depths of your psyche. Have you noticed recurring dreams in your life? Situations, people, or symbols that appear again and again while you sleep? These are not accidents. They are attempts by your unconscious mind to communicate with you, to show you aspects of yourself that need attention, integration, or healing. Many ignore these messages because they seem strange or illogical. But Jung showed us that the language of the unconscious is symbolic, not literal. It requires interpretation, not rational analysis. When you begin to dialogue with these symbols, When you allow them to speak to you, you are establishing a vital connection with the deepest parts of your being. This inner dialogue is fundamental to nourishing a mind that creates a positive reality. It's not just about repeating superficial positive affirmations while ignoring the roar of your internal dragons. It's about establishing a conscious relationship with all parts of yourself, even those that make you uncomfortable or frighten you. The anger you feel when someone crosses your boundaries, the envy that arises when another achieves what you desire, the fear that paralyzes you when you face the unknown. Jung taught us to see these emotions not as enemies to suppress, but as messengers bringing vital information. When you learn to listen to them, instead of silencing them, you discover profound truths about yourself that can transform your life. Did you know that Jung discovered that many of our deepest insecurities aren't really ours? They are what he called complexes, emotionally charged constellations that we inherit from our parents, our culture, or early formative experiences. That critical voice in your head that says you're not enough probably didn't originate with you. It's a psychic intruder, a complex that you unconsciously adopted. When you identify these complexes and consciously challenge them, you're taking control of what you nourish in your mind. You're saying, "This thought doesn't serve me. It doesn't reflect my deepest truth. I choose not to feed it with my energy." This act of conscious discernment is perhaps the most powerful tool we have for creating our reality. Jung understood that we cannot control all our thoughts. They arise from the depths of our psyche, for reasons we often don't fully understand. But we can choose which ones to feed with our attention, which ones to validate with our belief, and which ones to reject as not aligned with who we really are. And who are we really? This is the central question that Jung invites us to explore. Beyond our social roles, our temporary identifications, our wounds and defenses, who are you in your essence? Jung called this the self, with a capital S, the organizing center of the total psyche that transcends the conscious ego. When you nourish your mind with thoughts, experiences, and relationships that feed this authentic self, you begin to create a reality that reflects your deepest nature. You are no longer living from fragmentation, internal contradiction, or conflict. You are consciously aligning your outer being with your inner truth. This alignment doesn't happen overnight. Jung emphasized that it's a lifelong process, what he called the path of individuation. There will be resistance, setbacks, moments of doubt. The ego will fight to maintain its familiar patterns, even when they cause you suffering. The unintegrated parts of your shadow will try to sabotage your progress in subtle ways. But with each conscious step you take, with each thought you deliberately choose to nourish, you are reclaiming your power as a creator of your experience. You are declaring, "This is my mind, my inner garden, and I consciously choose what to cultivate here." Look around you right now. The relationships you have, the work you do, the health you experience, your finances, your passions, none of this is accidental. It's a precise reflection of what you've been nourishing in your mind, consciously and unconsciously, for years. If there are areas of your life that don't satisfy you, Jung would invite you to look not outward for solutions, but inward. What beliefs are you feeding that keep this situation in place? What parts of yourself have you rejected or repressed that now seek expression through seemingly external circumstances? I remember a client who constantly attracted partners who abandoned her. On the surface, it seemed simply like bad luck or a series of untrustworthy men. But when we dug deeper, we discovered that since childhood, she had internalized the belief that she wasn't worthy of being permanently loved. Her father had left when she was little, and she had unconsciously concluded that people I love always leave me. This belief had become a toxic seed in her mental garden, and although she consciously desired a stable and loving relationship, she was unconsciously nourishing this belief with each new experience of abandonment, strengthening it with every tear shed. It's not that she was magically attracting men who would abandon her. It's that she was unconsciously selecting partners who showed early signs of non-commitment, ignoring the alarms, and then interpreting the inevitable outcome as confirmation of her fundamental belief. The change began when she realized this pattern. Awareness was the first step. Then came the harder work, actively challenging this belief, deliberately nourishing thoughts of self-esteem and worth, and making different decisions in her relationships. It wasn't easy or quick, but over time, her relational reality began to transform. Jung taught us that the path forward goes through the interior. If you want to change your external life, you must change your internal landscape. You must consciously alter what you nourish in your mind, day after day, moment by moment. Does this mean we should ignore the negative aspects of life or pretend everything is perfect when it's not? Absolutely not. Jung was emphatic about the importance of psychological honesty. Denying the shadow, ignoring suffering, or suppressing negative emotions only pushes them deeper into the unconscious, where they exert even more power over us. The key is not toxic denial, but conscious integration. It's recognizing fear, anger, or sadness when they arise, honoring them as important messengers, extracting their wisdom, and then consciously choosing what to do with those emotions. You don't let them control you, but you don't pretend they don't exist either. This is perhaps the most important distinction. Nourishing your mind doesn't mean filling it only with superficial, positive thoughts. It means establishing a conscious relationship with your complete psyche, light and shadow, joy and pain, strength and vulnerability. It's creating a mental garden where all plants have their place and purpose, but where you consciously decide which to cultivate and which to prune. Jung understood that true transformation doesn't come from escaping our shadows, but from illuminating them with the light of consciousness. When we face our deepest fears, when we dare to look at what we've been avoiding, something extraordinary happens. We discover that the very energies that terrified us contain gifts and potentials we need to become whole. That anger you've repressed contains your capacity to establish healthy boundaries. That sadness you avoid hides your capacity for deep compassion. That fear you deny conceals your intuitive wisdom about what needs attention in your life. When you begin to see your negative emotions and thoughts not as enemies, but as parts of you seeking integration, everything changes. You're no longer at war with yourself. You're no longer spending precious energy suppressing aspects of your being. You're channeling all that energy toward the conscious creation of your reality. Ask yourself, what are you avoiding right now? What emotion, memory, or personal truth have you been repressing because it seems too painful or uncomfortable to face? Jung would tell you that right there, in that blind spot, lies a crucial piece of the puzzle of your transformation. When you have the courage to look at what you've been avoiding, when you nourish that part of you with compassionate attention instead of rejection, you discover internal resources you didn't even know you possessed. And those resources are exactly what you need to create the reality you wish to experience. Have you ever wondered why some people face devastating tragedies and emerge stronger and wiser, while others are consumed by much less severe circumstances? Jung would explain this as a difference in how these people interpret and process their experiences. In other words, how they nourish their minds in response to life's challenges. Those who manage to transform suffering into growth aren't simply thinking positively. They're doing something much deeper. They're finding meaning in their suffering. They're asking themselves, what can I learn from this? How can this experience help me grow? What parts of me need attention and healing? When you nourish your mind with questions that seek meaning, instead of questions that reinforce victimization, you begin to create a fundamentally different reality from the same external circumstances. It's not that suffering magically disappears, but that it transforms into a catalyst for your evolution instead of a sentence of perpetual misery. Jung understood that suffering that isn't transformed is transmitted. If you don't consciously process your wounds, you'll inevitably project them onto others or turn them into patterns of self-harm. But when you have the courage to face your pain with compassionate awareness, when you nourish it with the light of your attention instead of burying it in the shadows, That very pain becomes the seed of your greatest strength. Think about the people you admire most, those whose wisdom, compassion, or creativity inspire you. If you knew their stories intimately, you would almost invariably discover that they have transmuted some deep suffering into the gold of lived wisdom. Not despite their challenges, but through them, they have cultivated extraordinary qualities. This is the transformative power of consciously nourishing your mind. It's not about escaping suffering or pretending everything is perfect. It's about using every experience, especially the difficult ones, as opportunities to awaken, to expand your consciousness, to become more fully who you really are. Jung reminded us that what you resist persists, what you accept transforms. When you nourish all parts of your being with compassionate acceptance, when you stop fighting against the reality of your experience and instead use it as raw material for your evolution, you are consciously participating in the creation of your reality. Your mind is the filter through which you experience everything. It's the lens that determines what you see, what you don't see, and how you interpret what you perceive. When you consciously change that filter, when you clean that lens of unconscious distortions, you literally change the world you inhabit. Not because the external world magically transforms to fit your desires, but because your perception of that world, which is the only thing you really experience, has fundamentally transformed. Two people can live the same event and have radically different experiences based purely on how their minds filter and interpret that reality. Jung understood that most of us live in a trance, identified with our thoughts, emotions, and perceptions, without realizing that we are the observers of these phenomena, not the phenomena themselves. When you awaken from this trance, when you recognize that you are not your thoughts but the witness of your thoughts, you gain the freedom to consciously choose which thoughts to nourish. This awakening is what Jung called the encounter with the self, the realization that there exists a dimension of your being that transcends the conditioned personality you've identified with all your life. It's the experiential understanding that you are not just your fears, desires, stories, or identifications, but the consciousness itself within which all this arises and disappears. From this expanded perspective, you can begin to create your reality consciously instead of unconsciously reacting from conditioned patterns. You can observe a thought of insufficiency or fear arise and simply notice, "Ah, there's that thought again. I don't need to identify with it. I don't need to act from it. I can consciously choose to nourish a different thought that's more aligned with my deeper truth." This capacity for conscious choice is perhaps the greatest gift of being human. Jung understood that our freedom doesn't lie in controlling the external world or in eliminating all negative thoughts, but in our conscious response to what arises within and outside us. It's the space between stimulus and response, where our power as creators of our experience lies. How can you cultivate this space in your daily life? How can you strengthen your capacity to consciously choose what you mentally nourish? Jung recommended practices such as regular introspection, dream work, creative expression, and what he called active confrontation with the unconscious. A deliberate dialogue with the parts of yourself that you normally don't acknowledge. These practices aren't luxurious indulgences. They're essential investments in the quality of the reality you create. Because as Jung deeply understood, the way you nourish your mind will inevitably manifest in the world you experience. Observe your recurring thoughts. Are they of abundance or scarcity? Of connection or isolation? Of possibility or limitation? These thoughts are the seeds of your future reality. Which ones do you choose to plant and consciously cultivate? Examine your relationships. Do they reflect a consistent pattern? Do you attract people who value and respect you? Or do you find yourself repeatedly feeling ignored, rejected, or unappreciated? Jung would tell you that these relationships are mirrors of your relationship with yourself, external manifestations of how you're nourishing your own psyche. Consider your relationship with money, success, health. Is abundance flowing in these areas, or do you experience constant blocks, struggles, never enough? These patterns aren't accidents of fate, but precise reflections of what you're unconsciously nourishing in relation to these aspects of life. The good news is that once you see these patterns, you can begin to change them. Not through magical techniques or shortcuts, but through the patient inner work of transforming what you nourish in your mind. With every thought you consciously choose, every emotion you process with mindfulness, every limiting belief you challenge with compassion, you are literally reconfiguring the neural circuits that filter your experience of reality. Jung understood that this work isn't just for a privileged few or for those in extreme crisis. It's the birthright and responsibility of every human being who seeks to live a conscious life. It's the path to inner freedom that no external circumstance can grant or take away. When you deliberately nourish thoughts of abundance, you begin to notice opportunities that were always there, but that your previous filters prevented you from seeing. When you cultivate the belief that you deserve healthy relationships, you naturally establish boundaries that previously seemed impossible and attract people who reflect this new internal standard. Not because you're magically manipulating external reality, but because you fundamentally change the filters through which you perceive, interpret, and respond to that reality. You've altered what Jung would call your dominant psychic complex, the constellation of thoughts, beliefs, and emotions that organizes your experience. This change doesn't happen instantly. Jung emphasized that real transformation requires time, commitment, and often a process of symbolic death and rebirth. The old self, with its limiting patterns and restrictive beliefs, must die for a more expansive and conscious self to emerge. This process can be uncomfortable. It may involve periods of confusion, doubt, and even despair as the old structures crumble, but the new ones aren't yet fully formed. Jung called these periods the dark night of the soul, times of disorientation that precede a deeper level of psychic integration. What's crucial during these times is to remember that you're in a process of transformation, not destruction. The discomfort you feel isn't a sign that something is wrong, but that something new is being born within you. It's the pain of expanding your consciousness beyond familiar limits, of breaking the shells of old identities that no longer serve you. When you persevere through this discomfort, when you continue to consciously nourish the thoughts, beliefs, and emotional states you want to strengthen, even when you don't see immediate results, you're participating in what Jung would call the opus, the great work of alchemical transformation of your being. This is perhaps the deepest understanding that Jung offered us, that the reality we experience isn't something fixed and immutable that happens to us, but a dynamic and co-creative process in which we actively participate through what we nourish in our minds. We are both the potters and the clay, constantly shaping our experience through what we choose to believe, perceive, and value. Isn't it amazing to think that at this very moment you have the power to begin creating a different reality simply by changing what you mentally nourish? Not through some external magical power, but through the innate gift of your consciousness, your capacity to deliberately choose which thoughts, feelings, and perceptions to feed with your attention. Jung showed us that this power has always been ours. It's not something we must acquire or earn. It's our essential nature that we've forgotten amid the distractions of modern life and social conditioning. Remembering this power, reclaiming it consciously, is the revolutionary act that can transform not only your personal life, but potentially our collective consciousness. Because what Jung understood, and what modern science is just beginning to verify, is that our minds aren't separated from each other like islands in an ocean. We are deeply interconnected at levels that our ordinary consciousness barely perceives. When you transform what you nourish in your own mind, you're contributing to a shift in humanity's collective consciousness. This is a thought both inspiring and sobering. It means that every thought you choose to nourish, every belief you decide to strengthen or weaken, every perception you cultivate or discard, has an impact that goes beyond your personal experience. You are, quite literally, helping to create the world in which we all live. Don't you feel the depth of that responsibility? Jung challenges us to be conscious not only for our individual well-being, but for our collective well-being. When you nourish thoughts of division, judgment, and fear, you contribute to a collective field of those same energies. When you consciously choose to cultivate thoughts of compassion, unity, and possibility, you strengthen those qualities in our shared consciousness. Let me be clear, this isn't an abstract theory or a spiritual philosophy divorced from everyday reality. It's a practical and transformative understanding of how our psyche works and how it interacts with the world around us. Jung spent decades meticulously documenting these principles through his work with thousands of patients and his own deep inner journey. What he discovered is that our mind is like a powerful projector. The images, beliefs, and expectations we harbor internally are continuously projected onto the screen of our experience. We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And when we change who we are internally, what we mentally nourish, we inevitably change what we experience externally. Think about the last major change in your life. Perhaps it was a career shift, the end of an important relationship, or a spiritual awakening. If you look closely, you'll probably discover that this external change was preceded by a change in your internal mental landscape. Something transformed in how you perceived the situation, in what you believed was possible, in what you were willing to accept or reject. This is the central principle that Jung bequeathed to us. The mind doesn't just perceive reality, but actively participates in its creation. And we can consciously choose how to participate in this creative process through what we choose to mentally nourish. Right now, as you listen to me, you have a choice. You can treat these ideas as interesting information, but ultimately irrelevant to your everyday life. Or you can allow these seeds to plant themselves deeply in your consciousness, recognizing that they contain the potential to fundamentally transform your experience of life. Jung believed we face this choice constantly. We can live automatically from unconscious patterns and conditionings that we inherited or absorbed without questioning. Or we can live consciously, deliberately choosing what to nourish in our minds moment by moment, day by day, and thus actively co-creating the reality we experience. This choice has never been more important than in our current world. We live in times of unprecedented change, where the amount of information and stimulation we receive daily far exceeds what our ancestors experienced in years or even entire lifetimes. The ability to consciously discern what we allow to enter and take root in our mental garden is perhaps the most crucial skill for navigating these times. Jung saw that those who don't develop this capacity for conscious discernment inevitably become passive receivers of the dominant collective projections, whether of fear, division, scarcity, or superficiality. They are at the mercy of forces that seem external, but that actually operate through their own lack of consciousness. But he also saw something else: the extraordinary potential for transformation that arises when even one person chooses to break this collective trance and begin to consciously nourish their mind. He saw how this act of individual awakening creates ripples that affect the collective consciousness in ways that transcend the limitations of space and time. Are you ready to be that person? Ready to reclaim your power as a conscious creator of your experience? Willing to honestly examine what you've been mentally nourishing and make changes where necessary? If so, Jung would offer you these practices to begin. First, develop the habit of observing your thoughts without fully identifying with them. Practice asking, is this thought really mine, or is it something I've absorbed? Does nurturing it serve me? Is it aligned with who I really am and the reality I wish to create? Second, pay attention to your dreams. Jung considered dreams as direct messages from the unconscious, revealing aspects of yourself and your situation that your conscious mind may not perceive. Keep a dream journal. Look for recurring patterns and symbols, and ask yourself what they might be communicating to you. Third, cultivate a conscious relationship with your shadow, those parts of yourself that you've rejected, repressed, or denied. Ask yourself, What qualities or characteristics trigger a strong emotional reaction in me when I see them in others? These reactions often point to aspects of your own shadow that you're projecting. Fourth, create conscious rituals that align your mind with what you wish to manifest. It can be as simple as a few minutes of visualization in the morning, or as elaborate as a regular creative process involving art, writing, or movement. What matters is the conscious intention behind the ritual. Finally, but perhaps most importantly, cultivate compassion toward yourself as you embark on this journey. Jung understood that the path of consciousness isn't linear or perfect. There will be setbacks, periods of confusion, and moments when your old patterns resurface. The key isn't perfection, but compassionate persistence, the willingness to keep choosing consciously even after having temporarily forgotten. Remember that you're not alone on this journey. Jung envisioned human consciousness as a vast ocean, where each individual mind is like a wave that rises and returns to the same shared water. When you transform what you nourish in your own mind, you're contributing to the evolution of our collective consciousness. You're creating ripples that affect the entire ocean. Now, let me leave you with a question to reflect on. If you truly understood that the way you nourish your mind directly creates the reality you experience, what would you do differently starting today? What thoughts, beliefs, or perceptions would you begin to consciously cultivate? And what would you stop feeding with your precious attention and energy? Your answer to this question could be the first step in a journey that will transform not only your personal experience, but the quality of our shared consciousness. As Jung would remind us, the world we collectively experience is the sum of what each of us individually nourishes. And it changes one thought at a time, one mind at a time, one life at a time. If this message has resonated with you, I invite you to share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. Leave your reflections in the comments. I'd love to know which part of these Jung teachings impacted you most deeply, or what insights you've had while listening. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications for more content that explores how the profound truths discovered by thinkers like Jung can transform our everyday experience. Together, we can create a community of people committed to consciously nourishing their minds and, by extension, creating a more expansive reality for everyone. Remember, the way you nourish your mind not only creates your individual reality, it contributes to the reality we all share. Choose consciously, moment by moment, day by day. Your mind is the most powerful garden you will ever cultivate, and the entire world benefits when you nourish it with wisdom, compassion, and awakened consciousness. Thank you for your presence and attention. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring together the fascinating territories of the human mind and its extraordinary power to create the reality we experience.